Gisela Vicente. I'm halfway home, Armando said, gripping the steering wheel with one hand and holding the phone with the other. The road is horrible. I won't go back. On the other end of the line, the director of the hospital where Armando had worked for 10 years begged him to come back to operate on an urgent patient with acute appendicitis. Armando had already performed a 2-hour operation today without complications, but he was very tired. Overall, he was very tired lately. In 6 months, he could start preparing his retirement papers. He had a long record of service as a surgeon, but fatigue was accumulating with practice and was wearing him out. Gisela Vicente, Armando continued. Pablo Toro is on call now. He can manage without me. Yes, I think he can operate on the patient. It's time for him to start doing it himself. Yes, I can vouch for him. The guy may not be self-confident, but he is intelligent. Armando turned off the phone and took the wheel with both hands. It was late November, but today it was snowing heavily, so the road was barely visible. The snow melted during the day and crunched like broken glass under the wheels. I'm tired of this, Armando thought. I'll retire and forget the hospital like a bad year. I'll travel the world, see how people live in other countries, warm myself in the sun, lie on the sand by the sea, drink a cold Coca-Cola, and smoke a good cigar. True, half the world had been locked down for a year because of COVID-19 and the borders were closed. An entire wing in the hospital was reserved for coronavirus patients. There was a shortage of oxygen and ventilators for the regular intensive care unit, and there were fewer and fewer beds available every day. Even though they had turned this wing into a red zone, few doctors took the necessary precautions. Moreover, many of them did not even believe in the actual existence of such a deadly virus. This attitude seemed even stranger to Armando, as there had been more than enough deaths in the hospital. Armando sighed heavily and wanted to get rid of all this mess, but at the same time, it scared him. So his thoughts of traveling to warm countries were nothing more than naive attempts to convince himself that the time had come to retire. In reality, he had no idea how he could be free and what to do with himself 24 hours a day without work. As annoying as it was sometimes, Armando still had no idea what his life would be like in the future. He frowned and stepped on the accelerator, eager to get home as soon as possible. At that moment, he saw between the streetlights a black figure of gigantic proportions, sprinkled with snowflakes flying towards him. He slammed on the brakes. The car scraped against the frozen crumbs. He spun around twice and stopped, his seatbelt squeezing his chest painfully. A meter in front of him, Armando saw a huge moose standing motionless, moving its sides and blowing thick clouds of steam from its nostrils. The moose stared at him. Red embers reflected in the lantern light in the animal's eyes. Armando's heart was beating frantically. He was lucky he hadn't been dragged along the road into the woods and overturned the car. The moose nodded, shook its intimidatingly sized antlers, and walked slowly to the other side of the road. Armando stood there for a minute, enveloped in the fumes from the exhaust pipe, then slowly moved forward, watching the road intently. But he had barely gone 20 meters when he saw a new obstacle. A human body, lightly covered in snow, lay in the middle of the road. It was hard to believe what was happening, but Armando saw no reason to doubt it. He got out of the car and approached the corpse. It was a girl in her underwear. Armando felt for a pulse, but her heart was barely beating. There was a scarlet blood stain under her head. No other wounds were visible at first glance. Armando looked around carefully. As far as the snowfall allowed, there was no vehicle within 10 meters of where the girl could have fallen in an accident, nor any other reason to explain her appearance in the middle of a snowy night track. And who travels by car almost naked? There was no time to think of any theories. The girl was clearly in critical condition. She had to be treated immediately. There was no point in calling an ambulance. By the time they arrived, it would be too late. Armando went back to the car, opened the back door, picked up the girl, and carefully put her in the car. He turned on the phone and dialed the number. Gisela, how is Toro doing with the operation? Fine. When it's over, tell him not to relax. I'm on my way there. I need him. No. Something happened to me on the way. I'll tell you later. I have a girl with a head injury. She'll need a CAT scan and all the tests right away. She may need surgery. No, Gisela Vicente. Nothing's wrong with me. I had nothing to do with her. I found her like that on the road. Anyway, I'll be at the hospital in about 30 minutes and I'll explain everything to you. Okay, see you there. Armando's heart was still pounding in his chest. If it hadn't been for the moose, who knows if he would have seen the girl on the road, or if he would have run right over her. Most likely he wouldn't have seen her. Just in time, that moose was on the road. If the girl manages to recover, she'll have to put up a monument to the moose. Armando turned around and drove in the opposite direction. This time, he drove fast, ignoring the snow. He was so full of adrenaline that he could make out objects on the road and control himself as clearly as in the most difficult of operations. Sergio was already outside the hospital with a stretcher ready. The two of them carefully lifted the girl onto a stretcher and headed to the MRI scanner. Gisela Vicente and a nurse joined them at the MRI scanner. They took a quick look at the girl. They checked her blood pressure. They took blood from a vein and ran some tests. The CT scan revealed a fairly serious head injury, but one that didn't require surgery. The bone was slightly crushed, a brain contusion, but none of that was critical. Armando didn't like the way the girl looked, though. It was clear there was some other reason she had collapsed so deeply into a coma. He asked for an ultrasound of her heart and abdomen. Who knew how long she had been lying on the sidewalk in -7 degrees? She could have suffered serious damage to her kidneys or liver. The ultrasound did reveal a kidney problem, and it was not caused directly by the cold, but had an earlier cause. A more thorough examination is necessary here, but at this point it was obvious that the girl's kidneys had completely failed. Treat the wound, Armando ordered again. Is there a bed available? There is one, said Nurse Marisa. Do you have any papers? How should we register you? She had nothing on her, Armando replied. That's how I found her. Maybe we should call the police. We can hold her until tomorrow, but without papers we might get into trouble. Maybe, Armando agreed. But we mustn't take her out on the street. We'll manage somehow. I'll call the police myself. And what does Gisela Vicente say? Nothing. What can she say? She's just as confused as we are. Okay, Marisa said. I'll do whatever you say. Armando left the MRI room and headed for the break room where Paulo Toro was already sitting, excited about his first solo surgery. He smoked greedily and drank thick black coffee from a huge glass. How did it go? Armando asked. I'm afraid to say anything in advance, Toro said, stubbing out his cigarette. I'd rather keep quiet for now. Tomorrow everything will be clearer. Armando smiled tiredly. Why are you so superstitious, Paulo? It's the easiest of all operations. The easiest for you. For me, the first one without anyone's supervision. Were you as sure of yourself in your youth as you are now? I guess not. I don't remember those times. It's like 100 years have passed. What's that fuss in the waiting room? Girl with head trauma and kidney failure. Are we going to operate? Did you ask me to keep the bed? No, let's go over the details first. Thank God, Toro exhaled. 2 operations in a row are still too much for me. You can relax now, Armando reassured her. Excuse me, I have to make a call. He left the room and called the police, briefly explaining what had happened. The police promised him that an investigator and a forensic scientist would be at the hospital in the morning. It is not clear what use a forensic investigator is in the morning when there is no trace of the incident on the road, but Armando was not offered any other options. The girl, who never regained consciousness, was connected to an artificial kidney. Her head wound was stitched up, and further tests were carried out. Her condition has more or less stabilized. At least, He'll probably live until an investigator comes. Armando sat on a bench in the empty hallway, where the fluorescent lights flickered. He didn't feel like talking to anyone. As the adrenaline wore off, fatigue took hold of him even more strongly. His eyes closed, and his thoughts began to jumble together in his head. So he fell asleep, leaning against the cold wall, shuddering from time to time at fragments of sleepy visions in which a huge moose appeared before him each time, staring at him with unblinking red eyes. He was awakened by a noise in the hallway. Armando looked at his watch. 4 in the morning. He soon saw Gisela Vicente and 2 men approaching. "Armando," the hospital director said, "these men have come to see you about the girl." "Hello," said one of the men, about 50 years old, with a mustache and a flat nose, like old boxers tend to have. "Aniceto Benitez," he introduced himself. "Let me ask you a few questions, and then we'll write up a report." "Yeah, sure." Armando stood up and shook his hand. "How are you?" The second man, very young, just nodded and said nothing. He was apparently a coroner and was carrying a briefcase that looked like a medical bag. The conversation was brief. Armando gave the investigator all the details of what had happened. He even mentioned a moose. He nodded, occasionally jotting something down in his notebook. "Well, can you show me the place where you found the girl?" "I guess so," Armando answered uncertainly. "It was dark and snowing, but at least we have a rough idea." "The idea is not to look at it roughly, but to be exact," the investigator remarked. "I'll try." They went to the girl's room. "Has she not regained consciousness yet?" Aniceto Benitez asked. "No, she has not." "Serious injuries?" "Severe brain damage." "Vidal, do you know what I mean?" The investigator turned to the criminalist. "Quite a bit," he answered carefully, taking the girl's fingerprints. "I'll take DNA too. Maybe we'll find it in the database." "The coma seems to be superficial," Armando added. "The pupils respond to light. Let's hope she doesn't go into a vegetative state." "How long will it last? Will she be able to talk?" "I can't say. Maybe a week, maybe a month. But she won't be able to talk for a long time either way. In addition to the injury, she has a big problem with her kidneys." "What kind of problem?" "End-stage chronic kidney failure." "What does that mean?" "She's going to need a hemodialysis machine. If the tests confirm the preliminary diagnosis, she'll need a kidney transplant." "Wow!" The investigator shook his head. "What a shame. Will the girl survive?" "She's young. She'll make it. And we'll help in any way we can, so she didn't have any documents on her." "Number no signs of sexual assault. Have you looked at her?" "Yes, we did. No signs of sexual assault, I understand." "Are we going to that place then?" "Let's go." Armando went into the living room to get dressed. A blushing and excited Gisela Vicente followed him. "Armando, what's wrong?" "Still nothing. We'll go to the place. To find out who it is?" "Yes, how would I know? They'll try, at least." "What are we supposed to do?" "Do what?" "I just hope she wakes up. Then everything will be clear." "Don't say that word to me." "We just wait for her to wake up?" "She'll have plenty of time to heal. The board will be here soon." "What do I tell them?" "Well, don't tell them anything yet. They'll go through the coronavirus patient wards. What do they care about this wing?" "Oh, I don't know, Armando. They'll find something to do. I don't feel comfortable. I have a bad feeling. Why is everyone so superstitious today?" "That's what Toro says." "What does Toro say?" "Come on, Gisela, everything will be fine. Don't worry, I'm leaving. Come on, God be with you. Don't break a leg." Arming himself undignified, he frowned and left the room. The place where he had picked up the girl had been found after all. There were traces of blood on the road because it had not yet been cleared. Forensic investigator Vidal took all the necessary samples, made measurements, and photographed every detail. Even Armando's car was checked for signs of a possible accident. "Do you think I did it?" Armando asked, gesturing with his eyes to the CSI. "This is our job, Armando. You should understand." Now it is important to work out even the most unlikely of versions. Yes, of course. The doctor nodded. I understand. At that moment, his phone rang. The number was unknown. Yes, I can hear you. Armando Borrego? Armando didn't recognize the voice on the line either. Yes, it's me. Where are you? Are you okay? Who's speaking? Major Science, tell me, where are you now? At work? Is something wrong? Why are you calling me? I see. There was noise and anxious voices on the other end. Has anyone else been staying in your flat apart from you? Major, I don't understand why you're asking me these questions. Can you explain? Yes, of course, I'm sorry. I see you haven't heard yet. Anyway, you'd better go up to your house now. You'll see. Good. Armando was beginning to worry. I can't come now. Would you be so kind as to explain over the phone? Okay. The commander hesitated for a moment. Is your floor number 43? Yes, that's right. The neighbor downstairs had a gas explosion. What? Armando stood still. Gas. Cotton. That's what they call it now. 3 floors completely collapsed. We're clearing the rubble right now, calling the tenants, thank God. No casualties, I think. Only the grandmother on the 3rd floor was hurt. Still, you'd better come. After the events of that night, Armando was still not thinking clearly. And now the thoughts in his head refused to function at all. It was impossible to comprehend how much had happened in such a short time. Did anyone else live with you? The elder asked again. No, he lived alone. Then you are lucky. If you had been at home, you would have had very little chance of survival. You must come as soon as you can. Okay, I'll do it. Armando turned pale, holding the phone in his outstretched hand. Did something happen? The investigator asked. I can't believe it, Armando said in a low voice. What is it? There was a gas explosion on the floor below. It's a nightmare, the commander exclaimed. Were there any casualties? No casualties, I think. I have to go home. Can I go now? Yes, of course. You just have to sign the report. We're done here, Vidal? Yes, we're done, the criminalist said. I have no more questions for you, Aniceto Benitez continued. If you have any questions or any news about the girl's condition, please call here. The investigator handed him his business card. Call me anytime. Good. Armando took the card and put it in his wallet. Goodbye. I'll be sure to call. Goodbye. Armando got into the car, started the engine, and drove home trying to sort out the thoughts that were racing uncontrollably through his head. Outside, a sad scene awaited him. From the street, it was already clear that his apartment had disappeared. It had collapsed along with all the furniture on the floor below. His bed, which he was supposed to sleep in that night, was standing upright and had been pushed to one side by the heavy kitchen. The major was telling the truth. There was no chance that Armando could have survived such a situation. He found Commander Saez and asked him what he should do now. They'll give you a room in the sanatorium for the time being. You will have to stay there for a while. You don't have to worry about your papers and whatever is left of your belongings. They will return them to you. We will contact you when all the necessary procedures and investigations have been carried out. In the meantime, go to the administration. If you don't have your passport with you, show your driver's license. They will explain everything to you there. You will be in the sanatorium in the afternoon. And these apartments? Armando pointed at the building. Can they be restored or what? I can't say anything yet. The specialists will figure it out. The main thing is that everyone is alive. Don't worry. Under no circumstances will they leave you on the street. Armando walked around the administration offices until the evening. After the paperwork, he headed to the sanatorium. His room, though small, had all the conditions of home except for the internet. Even lunch and dinner were free. All the next day at work, he was pestered with questions and pity. They even offered to contribute to a rented apartment in case something went wrong at the sanatorium. Armando tried to remain calm. He assured everyone that he would take care of the problem himself. However, he sincerely expressed his gratitude for the care he received. By evening, he was tired of the hustle and bustle of the shift. He did not want to go back to the sanatorium. He visited the girl he had saved at least 5 times and asked the nurse Marissa if she had regained consciousness for at least a minute. Marissa shook her head and waved her hands. Gisela paced the wards and corridors with a grim expression, feeling that the situation with the new patient was becoming more and more unpleasant with each passing hour. She glanced at Armando out of the corner of her eye but said nothing. This made Armando feel more and more guilty, as if he had run over the girl on the road, driven her to the hospital, and then blown up his own flat. He felt melancholy and did not know how to dispel this melancholy so that the sun would shine in his life again. Paulo Toro, after contemplating his mentor's torment all day, could not bear it at night and suggested that Armando go to his house. He lived alone in a 2-room apartment, 3 blocks from the sanatorium. Armando agreed. He needed to talk, and Paulo turned out to be a good, sincere guy, and most importantly, he knew the line that should never be crossed in private, cordial conversations. They had been roommates for 2 years, ever since the day that, after graduating from the Academy of Medicine, Toro joined them at the hospital to train as an experienced surgeon. Paulo's apartment seemed surprisingly cozy. Nice curtains on the windows, a soft turquoise carpet on the floor, a huge plasma TV over the fireplace. There was even an aquarium with goldfish that Paulo went to feed as soon as he entered. For a bachelor's apartment, the furniture was even refined, which Armando immediately noticed. Armando himself had not had anything like that in the last years of his bachelor life. Paulo brought a bottle of light wine. They ordered some rolls and a couple of salads. And they sat down at the table. The conversation started immediately, flowing from one topic to another. "Have you ever thought about starting a family?" Armando asked, when the conversation turned to plans for the future. "Of course," Toro replied, "but first, I think you have to earn money. A family means children, and with children, you need a lot of money." "Well, they won't all appear in one day," Armando objected, feeling the hops beginning to exceed the heat in his body. "Step by step, all the problems will be solved." "It's always scary to think about it. I had similar doubts too." "You've never told me about your family, Armando," Paulo commented. "I don't even know if you're married or not. Was anyone else hurt in the explosion?" Armando thought about it. "I was married, but I didn't have children with my wife. I couldn't give birth. I had health problems, and she died 4 years ago too. It was 4 years yesterday." "Is that right?" "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I'm sorry." Armando didn't answer. "Are your parents still alive?" Toro asked after a pause. "My mother is in the country. She's 76 years old. It's very far from here. I go to visit her every summer. I keep begging her to move to the city, but she won't budge. Stubborn. She's lived there all her life. She only went to the nearest town a couple of times, and she didn't like it." "And your parents?" "They're fine. They live far away too. I have 2 sisters and an older brother, but he's in the army. I don't see him much. They all have their own families." At that moment, Armando received a phone call. GB appeared on the screen. "Yes, Gisela Vicente," Armando answered. "Armando, good evening. I wanted to tell you something this afternoon, but everyone was bothering me. I thought maybe I could solve the problem myself, but I never did." "What's the problem?" "It's the same problem, Armando, with the girl." "The girl?" Armando tensed up. "Anyway, in the morning, they called me to tell me that in 5 days, they were bringing an urgent patient with kidney problems. They will need a machine in an intensive care unit. There's only 1 vacant room in the entire hospital. We need to think of something. But I can't think of anything. I can't say no, you know? The man who booked the room is very serious." "What?" "The investigator hasn't found out who the girl is." "Nobody's called yet, Gisela. And what do you suggest we do?" I don't know, Armando. We need to put her somewhere. I had a hunch I was going to have a problem with her. Where do we put her? Armando raised his voice a little. First of all, she's the only witness so far. And second, you're not to touch her at all. She won't survive the transport. Yes, I understand, Armando. I'd better call the investigator and see if he can find any relatives. Then we will have time to do the transplant. There is no other way, Armando. Think about it. I don't know what to do. Okay, Gisela, I will think about it. Take your time. We will find a way. Look, Armando. Look. The hospital director concluded and hung up. What happened to the girl? Did something go wrong? Paolo asked when Armando hung up the phone. In 5 days, we have to vacate this room. Wait, I will make a call. He reached for his business card and dialed the investigator. But he had no new information. No surveillance cameras at the gas stations or nearby shops had recorded the unknown woman. He had received no missing persons report. As if she had just fallen from the sky, not a single clue. And no fingerprints were found in the database, nor was her DNA. Wow! Toro was surprised when Armando gave him the details of the conversation. But if she had been a criminal, she would have been quickly recognized. And if something happens to an honest person, it is as if they had never existed. There is only one way out, Armando. And what is it? A transplant. A donor. It is clear, but where to find it? Armando shook his hands. By law, only relatives can be donors, not even the husband or wife. But anyway, you are right. Now there is only one way out. Moving her somewhere else is deliberate murder. Something I won't let happen. He saved my life. If I hadn't found him on the road, he would have been under the rubble of my apartment. Yes, Toro nodded. You probably would have. You should have seen how my bed was. The moose saved the girl's life. Can you imagine? If it hadn't been for the moose, I would have run over her without realizing it in the snow. It's so strange. If someone had told me that story, I wouldn't have believed it. And it turns out that I am now the only one responsible for the girl. I felt it from the beginning. And what do we do now? Toro asked. And that "we" sounded unexpected to Armando. Paolo had unconsciously involved himself in the situation and considered himself part of it. And for that reason alone, Armando was very grateful to his partner. I'll tell you something, Paolo. I'll stay here tonight, do you mind? No, of course, Armando. Where will you go now? You stay. And tomorrow I'll go to Lucia's lab. She works from 7, right? Yes, what are you up to? If all goes well, I might still need your help. What kind of help? I'll tell you later. It's too early for that. I have to make some calls first. Talk to the right people. Oh, I hope everything goes well. It has to go well, Pablo, Armando said. Since fate has chosen me, it can't just be her mockery. I don't believe it. Now let's rest. I see that you've become superstitious too. Well, come on. Toro agreed without asking too many questions. I'll make a bed for you in the small room. In the morning, Armando went to the hospital laboratory without saying goodbye to Paolo, who was still fast asleep. Lucia was there. Armando had his urine and blood tested and then went to have his kidneys photographed. As expected, the comparative analysis with the girl's data gave a positive result. By lunchtime, it was quite clear that his kidney was compatible with the girl's. All that remained was to assemble a team of transplant specialists and anesthesiologists to organize a transplant in 4 days. Armando had himself assisted in a couple of liver transplants, so he knew a lot about these operations firsthand. In his long surgical practice, he had accumulated many debtors in these circles, where power was concentrated. He helped someone with references, someone with a place in a prestigious clinic, and someone who had personally operated on someone in critical situations. Many influential people. Their wives and children owe him their lives to this day. Armando never accepted money for his services, for which he was scolded even by his late wife. That's what everyone does. And he never once asked for anything in return. But now, he saw no other option. A friend of his from the Kidney Transplant Surgery Institute had agreed to help for a modest fee, but only if it was guaranteed that there would be no consequences. On one occasion, Armando had left a job in the capital to a colleague and gone to the city. They were only nominal friends, but Olegario, as he was called, was still in debt to Armando. He had to call the prosecutor. His son had also received help from Armando. The prosecutor promised to cover it up. Sooner or later, the girl's relatives would be found anyway, and then the paperwork could be done in a certain way so that everything would fit for the inspecting authorities. In the meantime, we must hurry. A transplant surgeon friend had managed to assemble a team and promised to be there in 3 days to properly prepare everything in the operating room. Toro also agreed to help, as did the nurse Marisa. Only Gisela Vicente ran around with her eyes wide and her face pale, knowing that if something went wrong, she would simply be fired from her post. That's the least, but the most she could go to jail for. She didn't even verbally agree to this adventure, but she didn't forbid it either, obviously. She told him not to mention it in front of her, as if he didn't know anything. She even granted herself a leave of absence from the emergency room and appointed Armando as the hospital's internal director. Only with the people from the committee who had come to visit had she made a quick tour of the wards where the coronavirus patients were treated. She organized a luxurious dinner for them in an expensive restaurant, violating the quarantine rules. And he disappeared. He even turned off his phone. 2 days later, Armando received 3 pieces of good news. First, Olegario kept his promise and went to the hospital with a 3-member team. Without asking any unnecessary questions, he looked at the scans and tests and was surprised by the high degree of compatibility between Arkady and the girl. He even asked if she was a relative of his. Well, what kind of relative, Olegario? Armando denied. If she was, why all the conspiracy? The test results are amazing, you know, things that happen in life, but whatever you say, tell me. Nothing has ever happened in my life, Olegario, and a relative I know nothing about can't just suddenly appear either. Anyway, this circumstance that happened to Olegario was the second piece of good news. And thirdly, what made Armando especially happy was that the girl began to open her eyes and to do reflex actions. Her condition had after all gone from a deep coma to a vegetative state. The operation was still complicated, but Olegario was very experienced, and the anesthesiologist who came with him was equally good. Besides, Armando's apartment was going to be renovated, and in a few weeks the repairs would be finished. Now all they had to do was pray that the operation would be a success, and then what would happen? Gisela Vicente continued to hide from her co-workers and remained unreachable by phone. Everyone resented her for this cowardice. Another day was needed to prepare the transplant. Armando signed all the necessary papers, and the girl was listed as his daughter. Her name and surname were left blank. In case of an unfavorable result, Armando assumed all responsibility and blame in writing. Of course, it all seemed like a dead letter, but there was nothing else to be done. Paulo Toro, as always, was more worried than the others. Armando encouraged him to be optimistic and even suggested that he perform an incision under local anesthesia, but Olegario categorically rejected this idea. It would not do much good for Toro, and Armando could become overexcited and overload his already young body. Everyone was aware of the risk. Esco. In the event of an unfavorable outcome, it would be impossible to explain what had happened. The mechanism would be set in motion, and not even the prosecutor would be able to stop it. Within a year or two, it would have been possible to sort things out at a great cost in nerves and money, but in the meantime, it would have been hard for everyone, and especially for Armando. Olegario did not say a single word about the possible consequences. Either he was so sure of himself, or he knew he had to pay what he owed, and she sincerely paid her debt. She was doing it here because Armando had given her his prestigious position at the time. Marissa was more than excited. She admired Armando's action because it was the only way out. All other paths would lead to the death of the unknown woman. Everyone knew that Marissa was a very sensitive person, which was not usually the case with medical professionals, especially those with experience. But only Lucia knew that this fragile girl, like Armando, was testing her compatibility for donation in the laboratory. But the result was negative, and even her blood type was different. A mysterious atmosphere was breathed around her, as if a miracle was about to happen. On the day of the surgery, everyone has become superstitious. The last words of the anesthesiologist, leaning over Armando, sounded as if from a distance, losing their clear meaning. Armando opened his eyes again to look at Toro, who was focused and serious. Noticing Armando looking at him questioningly, he gave him a slight nod. Armando calmed down and fell into a solid fog. Armando's awakening was painful. There was no way his mind could adjust its focus. There was an open window in the ICU where a little girl lay in the next bed on the left, and a palpable coldness could be felt in the room. "Wake up, Armando!" The voice that sounded like Marissa. Armando recognized her. He looked to his right and saw a nurse in a lab coat with a pink jersey underneath. She was looking at him with a smile on her face. Then Armando said, unsurely and hoarsely, "Did everything go well?" "It went well," Marissa confirmed and closed the window. "Is Olegario still here? How long has it been since the operation ended?" 2 hours ago. The doctor is still here. He and the team will leave tonight. Do you want me to call the doctor? Yes, call him. Marissa left, and 10 minutes later, Olegario appeared. "Well, Armando, how are you feeling?" "Yes, I'm fine. I'm still not thinking clearly. I've never been in a patient's shoes before. Good experience." "And the girl? How did the operation go?" "She's stable. Her kidney is working. Everything is within normal limits. The complications occurred somewhere else." "Which one?" "Gisela Vicente will tell you. I just want to warn you, so that you don't blame yourself for anything, no matter what happens. I knew what I was doing, and I don't blame you, and I won't blame you for it. Keep that in mind, and we'll sort it out as we go along." "I don't understand." Armando frowned. "What's the problem? Gisela will come later and tell you everything." "I don't know everything yet." "Okay, Armando, I have to go. I have to go out at night. There's an operation the day after tomorrow." "Okay. Thanks, Olegario. I'll call you when I get better. Don't worry, and don't rush. Let things calm down. Goodbye." And Olegario left, leaving Armando completely bewildered. By lunchtime, things had returned to normal. Marissa was hovering around him and the girl, but she couldn't answer his questions about the problems Olegario was hinting at, either because she didn't know anything or because she cleverly pretended not to understand. The situation was only clarified by Gisela Vicente, who didn't appear in the room until 4 in the afternoon and asked Marissa to leave them alone with Armando. "Armando, of course I understand. You've saved what you wanted. You've saved what seemed like a hopeless situation. You're incredibly lucky. I don't know what gods you prayed to, but they were on your side. But imagine yourself in my place. If the outcome had been the opposite, do you know what would have happened? You'll retire in 6 months, even on disability. But I couldn't go to jail. I have grandchildren to raise. My second daughter filed for divorce. Do you know how many problems I have with my children? No, you don't know. I couldn't stand it anyway. Even if you curse me, I won't ask for your forgiveness." "Wait, Gisela," Armando interrupted her. "I don't understand at all. What is the problem? Can you be more specific? Why is everyone speaking in riddles?" "I called yesterday and reported what was happening at the hospital. I couldn't stand it. My nerves were shattered. I couldn't believe the operation had been successful. I'm sorry. Tomorrow the investigators and officials from the ministry are coming. I want to tell you myself, and you will have to answer to them yourself. I'm telling you this so that you won't be surprised and so that you won't wonder who did it. I also told Olegario he knows. You can take care of the others yourself. Your destiny is in your hands. Do you realize how many people you have caused problems with your recklessness? Armando listened to Gisela Vicente's long monologue and closed his eyes, surprised that everything she had told him had not made any impression on him. The important thing was that the operation had been a success and that the girl would live. There was no time pressure now. There would be plenty of time now, and he would sort everything out. In that second, the seemingly apocalyptic problem for Gisela Vicente seemed like such a trifle that she could put it off and not worry about it. She smiled, and a hot tear slid down her cheek. "Good God," the hospital director said in surprise. "Has the whole place gone crazy? Well, keep smiling, I'm leaving. You'll regain consciousness and, well, you don't work for me anymore. I fired you. Goodbye." "Where am I?" She came from the bunk next to him. Armando opened his eyes and looked to his left. It was the girl who had spoken. He looked around incomprehensibly. "Where am I?" she said again and coughed. "My God," the hospital administrator said as she was about to close the door to the room behind her. "Marisa," she shouted loudly in the hallway, "come to the ward immediately." And Gisela Vicente came out, not wanting to participate anymore. Marisa came running and lunged at Armando, but he stopped her by pointing to the bed next to him. "God!" the nurse exclaimed. "She's awake! Where am I?" The girl kept asking, coughing more and more. "You're in the hospital! You're in the hospital!" Marisa smiled at her. "Cough, cough! You need to cough now, please. Be careful, don't try to get up and don't make any sudden movements. It's okay. Do you remember your name?" "Nati," the girl said after a moment's hesitation. "And what happened? How did I get here?" Marissa's eyes were already wet. "Yes, it's nothing," she said, taking Nati by the hand. "You're safe now. They found you on the road. Do you remember what happened? What's your last memory?" "No." The girl shook her head. "It's hard to remember, my head hurts." "Does it hurt a lot?" "A lot. I'm going to give you an injection. Stay still for a while." "Good," Nati said, turning her head to look at Armando. Nati, the man thought. What a funny name. He smiled as he looked at the girl and could no longer hold back his tears. Yes. What did it matter now what happened tomorrow or the day after? What a load of rubbish was all that. The important thing in her life was here and now. 2 more days passed. The euphoria of the success of the operation and the rescued girl coming back to consciousness calmed down a little. Instead, the ministry's investigation team, who had come to the hospital from the capital itself, became concerned. Armando was now able to get up and walk around the hospital. Moreover, after being questioned and agreeing not to leave, he returned to the sanatorium that same afternoon. He was forbidden to speak to Nati, and a police officer sent from the city was on guard outside his room. She was the only witness, and given the favor Armando had done her, the investigation suspected that it could have influenced her testimony. Her new kidney was functioning properly, and her body showed no signs of rejection. Nati could eat on her own and even walk to the bathroom, but they didn't dare to move her from the intensive care unit. Investigator Aniceto Benitez came and interviewed Nati twice during this time, but he didn't find out anything about her story. However, he also spoke to the doctor before he left. "I heard that you, Armando Alvarez, are having problems." "The main problems are over," he replied, "and I will deal with these little by little." The investigator thought for a moment and then said, "You did something great for the investigation. You saved the witness's life. Without his testimony, everything would have remained a mystery for a long time, if it would ever have been solved. I would like to help you in any way I can. If you need anything from me, keep that in mind. Whatever comes out of the capital, you know?" Armando had an unexpected thought. "I think I have. Yes, I have a request. You tell me, and I'll do my best. I have an idea. It may be silly, something like a straw you want to grab onto, but it's still worth trying. Armando Alvarez, believe me, there are no silly ideas in these complicated cases. You can't even imagine what seemingly unthinkable assumptions turn out to be the only truths in the end. They turn out to be the only truths in the end. Don't hesitate to tell me what you've come up with. You already have the results of Natty's DNA analysis, right? Armando asked. Yes, I'd like to compare my DNA with it. Uh-huh. The investigator figured it out quickly. Do you think Natty could be related to you? I saw in a file that she was listed in the medical records as his daughter. Did I understand that correctly? Yes, there is no objective evidence to prove it. But what if she is? Okay, when you're in town, stop by the police station and ask for CSI Vidal Soler. You already know him. I'll let him know. He'll do the right thing. Thanks, Aniceto Benitez. Yes, you're welcome. Get well soon. And so they parted ways. As soon as Armando left the hospital, he was so busy that he couldn't concentrate on anything else for a week. At first, he was busy with his apartment, which was about to be finished. Then, a lot of time had been spent finding a lawyer who would take on the case of an illegal operation, and there still wasn't enough energy to continue with it all. Armando returned to the sanatorium in the evening, exhausted, and immediately fell asleep to fight for his freedom and his life again in the morning. The conversation with Natty became more and more necessary. Aniceto Benitez was right. Armando's seemingly foolish assumption was 100% true. Or rather, 99.9%. His DNA matched Natty's with such precision that it indicated that she was indeed his daughter. It seemed totally incomprehensible, but Vidal had checked it 3 times. It was now an undeniable fact. Of course, this put the whole case of the operation completely in his favor, but he still had to make an official request for analysis to an independent laboratory. Attach it to the case, reassure a lot of people. It could take even a year. At least that was what the lawyer had intended. And yet, the black streak that had started on the highway when he stopped the car in front of the moose that had gotten in his way was over. And now everything around him only blinded his mind with a crystalline white tone. How could he not believe in a miracle? How to explain it if it is not a miracle? But there had to be a rational reason. And Armando searched diligently for it, delving into the most hidden corners of his past, and found it. In a strange way, it was almost erased from his memory because he had never relived that episode that happened 23 years ago. At that time, he and his wife were especially eager to have a child. The wife visited the best clinics, while she visited healers in remote forests and villages, and Armando became a true believer and prayed to the Almighty in the temples to be shown his mercy. He lit candles, spoke to the elderly and to the few who claimed that a similar miracle had happened to them. For a while, Armando even became a donor, believing that it would be fair to share with others the possibility of having a child. But his prayers did not seem to reach God, or perhaps God had other plans for Armando. At the same time, both the clinics and the healers also seemed helpless. So it was his and his wife's last attempt, and they did not consider the matter again, resigning themselves to their situation. Later, they even thought about adopting someone. His wife wanted a girl, but the necessary paperwork had barely been drawn up when his wife fell ill, and they did not have time for this. Armando remembered this in the middle of the night. Suddenly, with his heart pounding, he jumped out of bed and began to pace from one corner to another, not knowing how to suppress the urge to shout his discovery from the rooftops. He picked up the phone, thinking of calling Toro, but when he looked at his watch, he did not do so. He did not go back to bed until morning, and first thing in the morning, he went to see Aniceto Benitez to get permission to enter Nasta's room. The comparative DNA analysis was attached to the case, which was handled directly by Aniceto Benitez and completely changed its course, so there was no reason to prohibit Armando from having contact with the witness, and Aniceto Benitez gave him permission. Armando went to the hospital. On the way, he bought a beautiful bouquet of flowers and kept thinking about what words to say to his unexpected daughter, but he couldn't find anything sensible. In the hallway, Armando came face to face with Gisela Vicente. He lowered his eyes and walked past without even saying hello. Armando didn't hold a grudge against her, he just didn't want to think about her for a second. The policeman at the entrance to the ward looked at the permission and let the visitor in. Nati lay alone in the room. When she looked at the visitor and recognized him as her savior, she smiled. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi, Nati," Armando said excitedly. "We can finally talk. How are you?" "I'm fine." "Have they let you? Has the investigation finished?" "I'm sorry, that's not what I meant. First of all, I want to thank you. I don't know what I did to deserve such a sacrifice on your part." "No, Nati," Armando interrupted her. "Don't thank me. I should be the one thanking you for bringing us together." She looked at him in surprise. "I don't understand you." "Forgive me. Did I miss something?" Armando left the bouquet on the chair next to Nati and sat down next to her bunk on a chair. "I'll explain everything to you a little later. In the meantime, can you tell me how you ended up on that road? Do you remember anything?" "Yes, I remember now. I headed to the capital. I had to be there in the morning. I had a meeting with readers there. A final meeting and a presentation of my new book." Nati said thoughtfully for a moment and then fell down. "Are you a writer?" Armando asked. "Yes. The doctors gave me a clear diagnosis. I had a month to live at most, and I was taking stock." "And your relatives?" Armando interrupted her again. "Do you have any relatives? Was a transplant possible?" "Only my mother, but she also has kidney problems. There was no way I could be a donor, and I was number 133 on a list of organ donors. You know, I wouldn't have waited. My mother was very upset about the whole thing. On the way, I got a call that she had been taken to the hospital with a heart attack. It was nighttime, and it was snowing heavily. Of course, I turned around and ran home, cancelling all my activities. I met a man on the road. He was frozen, lightly dressed with a backpack. He needed a ride to the neighborhood, so I agreed to take him. I immediately thought it was strange, but I didn't pay too much attention to it. All my thoughts were focused on my mother and the worry that she probably wouldn't have time for now. An hour later, something happened that I still don't remember in detail. Anyway, this guy decided to just steal my car. He hit me in the head and I woke up in the hospital. How is your mother? Have you managed to talk to her? She's okay. She's recovering. I was in a mess and you saved me. Both on the road, and when you brought me back to life. Now it's your turn to tell it." Nati smiled tiredly again. "My story will seem fantastic to you, but believe me, it took me a long time to convince myself that all this is not a dream, but a reality. Do you know what the chances are of a man dying from a shark attack?" "No. Only 1 in 274 million. What does that mean? The system is even less conducive to a donor meeting his son." "What?" Nati got out of bed. "Are you saying that—" "Yes, I'm saying that you're my daughter. I'm sorry it turned out so crooked and unexpected." Nati collapsed back onto the pillow and stared at the ceiling. "Unbelievable. I think he must be sure of it, since he dared to tell me. The DNA test showed 99%. There was no doubt. I knew my mother was artificially pregnant, but I couldn't imagine something like that. Finding herself on a snowy road in the middle of the night, far from towns and cities, and in such circumstances, and with such an ending. Unbelievable." "I agree. Unbelievable, but true. It's been 5 years. This year, there was a lot of snow in the winter park and the children were making snowmen. They even organized a competition to see who could do it best. Armando, son, come to Mum. You're covered in snow." The 3-year-old turned around and waved his hand. "I'm with Grandpa. He lets me play." "Nati, are you really going to let him play a little longer? In 20 minutes, Paolo will be out of the operating room and we will all go home together." Armando smiled as he looked at his beloved grandson. Inati just sighed and continued the conversation with Nurse Marisa. They had become inseparable friends, and were now discussing new purchases. "Ah, there's Paolo," Armando smiled as he saw his son-in-law. "He's a good man, this Toro. Kind and decent. Inati is like a stone wall with him, and Grandpa Armando is always there if his help is needed. He will take care of his grandson, visit Nati's mother, and help her around the house. He is family, after all." Involuntarily, but Armando had never dreamed of such a family and planned to live his life alone. But it turned out to be incredible, a miracle.